Hi, my name is Ward Bell. I'm VP of Technology at IdeaBlade. This video describes how to take a large entity framework model and break it up into smaller models using DevForce. Now, the video is actually a companion to two other pieces. First and foremost is the essay on large models, which explains what the problem is, why you'd want to do it, why it's a good idea to have smaller models anyway, models that are dedicated to specific purposes within your application. And there is also the other piece, which is the big model breakup application, which illustrates the points raised in the essay and shows you mechanically how you would do this with DevForce. And this particular video that you're watching right now actually walks you through the process of after you've unzipped this big model breakup application. It gives you a tour and shows you how to do the things that I describe in that essay. So let's get on with it. After you've unzipped the application, you should end up with something like a big model breakup folder, and inside it are a bunch of subfolders, each holding various projects in the application. And there's the solution to hold it together, and there's a couple of command files that we'll be talking about a little bit later. When we open the solution, it looks a bit like this. Big Model Breakup is itself the main project that contains the tests that we're going to run. The tests that we're going to run that will illustrate how you can work with what was once a big model divided up into two submodels, Model A and Model B, as described in the essay. Now, Model A is devoted to customer resource management, relationship management. It's basically how we order things. And there's a DevForce model and an entity framework model. And Model B will be about product catalog management, and there's a DevForce model and an entity framework model. All of this started with what we pretend to be this gigantic database, which is Northwind IB, which is just like Northwind. We pretended it's huge, and that we were obliged to somehow divide it up into two conceptual modules dedicated to the separate purposes of the CRM module and the product catalog module. So if we were just to sort of take a look at Model A, as I said, we've got a DevForce side and an entity framework side. The reason I do that is, well, first of all, for clarity, I find it clearer. But secondly, when we create our entity framework model, we will need to deploy that on the server side, but we won't be deploying that to the client side of our application in an N-tier, if this were an N-tier application. And in certain cases, we really even couldn't if we wanted to. Let's take a peek at the entity framework model. I will double click, and now normally double clicking this should open the entity framework visual designer, but many times you will find that it does not, and you have to play this game of first opening it in XML. And now that you have done that and closed that, I don't know why this is true, but now I can this time open it in the normal way with the visual designer. Anyway, here it is: customers, orders, order details, and product. Watch that product. And the employee is really the sales rep. Let's go see what we have. If we look at the Model B, we open up that project and we see whether, no, we can't do that, so we have to play the same game. Open it up in XML, close it, now open it up again. Don't ask me why Visual Studio does this sometimes. And now you know how to get around it. So there's our product, and this time it has related entities, category, and supplier. Looking back at A for a second, you notice we have product here, but although it has category ID and product ID, there are no entities, so these IDs are just sitting out there. That's part of what we did when we separated them. So product here has related entities, but has no notion of orders or anything like that. Here we see that order details are associated with product, but the category and supplier are gone. So let's close all of these windows and see how that translates into our DevForce model. So I'll close the EF projects and we'll go in here, and now we'll take a look at the, we'll let the object mapper from DevForce show us how DevForce sees it. Now notice this is a completely Model A dedicated DevForce model pointing to the EDMX. And if we open this up, we see that we have the entities that we saw in Entity Framework. If we look at product for a second, this is not the default generated product. We've tweaked this a little bit in the object mapper. For example, because we don't have there are no navigation properties to category and supplier, we really shouldn't be exposing the category ID. So if we slide over a little bit, we'll see that that we've marked the getter and setter access as private for both the category ID and the supplier ID. The others remain public, at least in the getter, but we've also made their setters private, and for good reason, because as I describe in the essay, we've decided that a module dedicated to Model A, that nobody who consumes Model A should actually use it to change products. Products should simply be presented. So to make sure that they're not tempted to set any values, we've changed the setter access to private. If we then switch over to the separate model generated for Model B, and I bring the object mapper into view, we now see that this one has three entities in it that we saw in Entity Framework. And in this particular case, the product, the accessors are exactly as it was generated. We haven't fooled around at all, so they're all public. And of course now product has navigation properties to get the associated category and supplier for a particular product. Okay, so we now have a vision of that. There are some what's interesting is that there are some other features inside Model B here. You'll notice that there is a product CS file. If we go examine this, this is where I have decided that there is some common behavior that is true for all products, whether they're in Model A and Model B, and that is that they all have a foo property, for what that's worth. I've had to play a little game here with compiler directives so that we can see that we are going to be in the Model B namespace when we compile in Project B, Model B, and we'll have the model namespace Model A when we're inside when we're compiling this file inside the Model A project. Now, what do I mean by this kind of cross-compilation idea? Well, let's open this Model A DF up again, and you'll notice that right here we have a link, notice the shortcut, to the very same product CS file that we're examining here. As a matter of fact, if I were double to click it, it would tell us that the document is actually already opened, thus confirming that we're really talking about this same product. But what's going to happen is, therefore, is that when we compile, we build Model A DF, it's going to compile this in only using these compiler directives. It's going to do it with namespace A, and it will be separately compiled here. So we're going to have exactly the same code in Model A and Model B, but the trick is that there'll be separate types, but exactly the same code because they're sharing the same file. Just in case you didn't know how this worked, if I look at the properties for Model B, you see that the conditional compilation symbol has been set to Model B, and I did something similar in the Model A project properties. There's one other thing to note. Notice that there's a product B only CS here. This is where I created a bar property that would only exist for a product inside Model B. That is not linked to in Model A, which means if I were to look at Model A product type, it would not have a bar property. So you see that I've allowed I've got these two definitions of product, one in Model A, one in Model B, and they share a lot in common, both in terms of what's been generated and in terms of this this foo property. But I've allowed them to diverge a bit in some respects, and one of those important respects is that bar exists in Model B. And so that's my tour of Model A and Model B. Model integration, you will find in the essay that one of the things that I talk about there is some of the support for writing code that can bridge from modules that only know about A to get to modules that only know about B. So in the essay I talk about the product DTO, and here it is, and the code is described there. But you can actually see it at work here, including all of the decoration that's necessary to make this work in an end-to-your application. And the product extensions that I described there, where it becomes possible to say for a Model A, I can say for any given Model A product, dot to Model B, and I end up with a Model B. We'll actually look at that in the code sample in a second. We'll just close all of this up. So I think we are done with the tour of that, and we are ready to examine what's inside of our test project. So inside here are all of our MS tests for illustrating how we exercise these models independently and together, and how we write code that could bridge back and forth across them. Now, I think before I drill in entirely, what I want to do is sort of show you the solution at work. One of the things we should have done right away before we took our tour is we should have rebuilt the solution, or built the solution, because it comes without the DLLs. And what we're looking for is to see 7 succeeded. We want no errors, no warnings, no messages, nothing like that. I might have pointed out that I've shipped this. My intention is that you would be a DevForce user and you would have installed DevForce. But just in case you're just clicking the tires, there was this lib folder. And inside the lib folder, I put all of these DLLs that would be necessary in order to actually run this without DevForce installed. If you've installed DevForce, you can just blow this away. By the way, if you haven't installed DevForce, then some of what I just showed you in the video a second ago, namely double-clicking on the IBEDMX file and expecting the object mapper to show, none of that would happen because you don't have DevForce installed, so you don't have the object mapper installed. Okay, so getting back to my story, we've successfully built our project, which you could do with or without DevForce installed because of that lib folder. And now if I click this or press F5, what I'm expecting to see is that my tests are running. I've got 15 of them. I don't care about the object browser there. Let's see our test results. We're working our way through them, and there are 15 tests. Now, that could be a little bit easier to see if we group them by class name, and what we'll find is that there's a breakup test fixture and a light integration test fixture. The stuff that really illustrates the things that I wanted to talk about big models and breaking them up are all in breakup test fixture, and they're all methods that we see here. This one here is kind of a little bonus class in which I'm testing something completely unrelated to what we're talking about, namely how you would write unit tests without actually going to a database. So that's kind of a bonus for those of you who want to explore it. Well, what we're going to look at in this video is the breakup test fixture, which is right here. So this is our breakup test fixture class, which is the one class that holds all of our tests to explore the division of a big model into two models, A and B. And it would take me quite a while to walk through everything in withering detail, so I'm just going to try and orient you, and then I'll have you look at these methods yourself. So all I'm going to do here is give you a rough idea of how this is put together and what you could expect. So here's our class, and it has a constructor which creates a new entity manager every time. What that means is that the way the test runner is going to work is it's going to create a new instance. Each time it runs a test method, it's going to create a new instance of breakup test fixture, which means that each method runs against its own clean copy of the manager. There'll be no pollution from one test method to another when we run them. Which is, of course, what we want. We want to be able to run our tests in any order and not have them interfere with each other. This is the simplest test. Can get the customer named Alfred's, and it does some setup, and then it does a setup here and then an assert. You'll notice that I'm making use of a helper class, a Model A Scenarios helper class. And so what I'm doing is I'm taking my manager and passing it into a method of that helper class. This is what I do a lot so we can sort of see elsewhere in the helper class the kinds of code that you would write um, to um, to exercise this model, but our tests stay relatively clean. So what about this one, for example? What it does is, given a manager, it knows about the customer Alfred's. It's a well known. That's the first customer in the Northwind database, and so it writes one of our link queries to go get that. And there's the where clause. But this is talking about Alfred's graph, so it's not going to just get the customer. It's going to get some of the other related entities to that customer, namely that customer's orders and the order details of each of those orders, and the Model A product associated with that. So when we get Alfred's, we don't just get Alfred's. Also under the hood, we're populating the entity cache with Alfred's orders, order details, and products, and that gets used a number of places in our tests. But at this point, we're just trying to establish that we could actually retrieve a customer, the Alfred's customer. It's in the next test that we do something to validate that we're actually getting something in the graph. So again, we go exercise the graph, but we don't really care about the customer that comes out of it. The key thing, and you'll see this a lot, is that we're going to disconnect the manager. You'll see this in test after test. The goal is, whenever you see that phrase, is what we're trying to say is, from this point forward, there will be no way that the manager can go out to the database. That proves that we're not doing these sneaky under the hood, because we're going to do a lot of tests that sort of assert that I can do all these things on the client side without ever going to the server. In this particular case, I'm going out to get a product just from cache, and I'm establishing that that's a real product, not the null entity, thus showing that I can get a product. And then I go on to do similar things here. In this particular case, I become aware of one of Alfred's products, and it crops up throughout the test. It's the sauerkraut product, and the sauerkraut product exists both in Model A and Model B, of course, just in their different types. Here I show that I can just as easily access Model B as Model A. It too has a Model B scenarios helper class, supporting various methods whose names I hope reveal the intention. This is a kind of cool test because it establishes that I can, in the same physical entity manager, I can have simultaneously a product with exact same product ID, but one that is a Model A product and one that is a Model B product, and they can both coexist. In the next series, there are variations on the theme of being able to take a product from one model, and without going over to the server, I'm able to translate that product value for value into a product of the product type in the opposite model, and you'll see variations on that theme all the way down through here. At which point, somewhere around here, I believe, I establish not only that I can move a whole bunch of products, I can take a whole bunch of products from Model B and translate those into products from Model A, and I can actually put them in a target. I'm sorry, take a whole bunch from from Model A and move them to Model B and put them in a separate manager, a separate entity manager devoted to Model B type objects. So that's what's going on here, and proves that that can be done. But that wouldn't be enough. What we would want to be able to do is not only take products from A, construct products from B, throw them into a Model B manager, but we would also then be able to, we ought to be able to make changes and to these products and then save them, even though we hadn't made the trip to the database. So a lot of what you see in here, such as manager B save changes and so forth, and a bunch of asserts down at the bottom, are all part of what this test is trying to do, which is to validate that we can make changes in place in cache, and then actually, when we're ready, we can actually connect to the database and save them, and everything will work just like we would want it to. The final test here illustrates a point I made about how sometimes in Model A, We want material about the product that is simply inaccessible to us when we look at Model A. Namely, in this case, we'd like to know the category name and the supplier name. Well, there is no category and there is no supplier in the Model A universe. So if we needed to display the shipper and we need to display the category, what would we do? And the solution that was proposed here is that we could rely on some other assistance, some service or something like that. It would still be on the client side, not going cross-boundary, but something that knew about Model B, and we could ask that service to construct a kind of a view, a projection of a product that included the bits of information that are about category and supplier that we cannot otherwise know in Model A. And so that's what we're doing here. We have to rely on a Model B scenario that constructs the DTO, and you'll just follow this and look at the code, and you'll see how that's done. And then you have to imagine that this product DTO is somehow made available to a world that only understands Model A, but fortunately it does understand product DTO, where it can find stuff. In that product DTO is stuff like category name, which is just a string. All these asserts are then validating that the value of the category name in this DTO is in fact, for example, identical to the true category name of the category associated with this sauerkraut B. So we're making sure that we're doing what we say we're doing. So that's the sort of the overview and the spirit of the test fixture as it comes to you. Oh, one more thing. When we've been running this, when we got all these wonderful green lights after we went through the 15 tests, one of the things that is true is that we were running all this time in two-tier, and there's a good chance that your application is going to want to run in multiple tiers, at least 3 tiers. So what we're going to do next is we're going to look at how to set this up to run in the simplest possible 3-tier scenario. I'm going to set us up so that we run in the simplest form of n-tier possible, which is to create a middle tier, a server, if you will, that's running as a console app. And let me close this. Close that up for a second. Now, in the solution items, I have the version of the command file that will do this, set this up for us. That works if you have DevForce installed. Let me just show you where those are. These are the 2 commands. This is the one for if DevForce is installed, and this is the one if DevForce is not installed, which is in fact what it says. Let me show you. This is pretty darn simple. All it's doing is it's going to create a directory called console server. It's going to copy some things. This is the DevForce version again, so it's getting it out of where DevForce was installed. It's going to copy this exe in. It's going to copy an app config, which will be very important to us, and then all the DLLs that we need on the server side. That relate to our application. And so that'll be the 2 EF DLLs and the 2 DevForce DLLs and a model integration DLL, which we need because that's what holds the product DTO, which we showed earlier and which we need on the server side because we're actually going to have that DTO serialized over across the wire. We don't have any of the test projects, of course, because there's not supposed to be any UI. Then the last steps of this will be to change to the console server directory and actually launch the exe. And that's pretty much what it does. And the one for those who don't have DevForce installed is pretty much the same thing. All right, so let's see if I can actually execute it from within here. Now all I can do is to show it to me. Okay, so I've got to bring that back up again, and now what I will do is I will run it. And just so you can see what happened here, before it can execute the last step, it's going to ask me, am I allowed to do this because I'm running in Win7? And And here is the actual server running. By the way, here is the one that did all that copying and then executed the server. We don't need that anymore. And you'll notice that it's listening on localhost 9009, and it will run until we either press enter or close it. So I'm going to put this away for the moment, leave it still running. Meanwhile, back here, we're still set up to run two-tier. And as a matter of fact, if I hit F5, everything will continue to run two-tier. So what I need to do is tell my test project here to now use the to go talk to that server instead of doing it in two-tier. And the way I do it is I open up the app config, and you will notice here we're talking about the object server, and there's this is distributed. And I'm just going to change that to true. Okay. Having done that, now notice it's going to say, oh, I'll be now that I'm going to be distributed, I'm going to begin here. I'm going to talk to localhost 9009, which you may recall is exactly what our server is right now. It's listening on 9009, so we're all going to be hooked up just fine. Having done that, we are now ready to go, and we run our tests, and we all run tests, so we have to tell it it's okay to run them again. And here she goes. Ka-chunk, 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 all tests pass. It takes slightly longer because we're firing up in the server going into here. The next time would be faster. Okay, so there, I've just done it. Now, it didn't look any different. How do I know that I actually did anything? And there are a number of ways, but the way that I find most convincing is here's that console server folder that I was talking about. And if we look in here, this had all the material that we copied, plus it created 2 debug logs. I'm sorry, it created a debug log with a CSS and so forth. If we double-click this, we will end up with a browser view, which I will now, I've just got to get that shrunk down and brought in so that you can see it. And what we see here is the log of what we have just done here. This first part is when that server was first instantiated, and then this is all of the activity that we just did. Here, for example, is the call to create the DTO. So all the tests that we just ran were running here, and that would not happen if we were running in end tier. Okay. So once you satisfied yourself that this runs end tier as well, the thing that you want to do is you want to restore things. So we'll just set this back to default. Well, no, I'll leave this here like this so you can see what happens if you forget to do it. What I will do though is I will bring back the server and I will shut the server down. Okay. Now that I've shut the server down, if this is truly end tier and I try and run these tests again, I'm fully expecting that this should all fail, and it does. And the reason it fails, if we look at the test details, is because it's unable to create this class because it's unable to connect to the server, which may be down. And indeed it is. We just shut it down. So that's another proof point that I actually was running end tier before. Now, if I change this to false, and which means I'm running 2-tier again, and I run my tests again, let her rip, and we should, all of our tests should pass. And so with that, you have both learned how to do a quick and dirty from 2-tier to n-tier deployment and been able to demonstrate that you can actually run your tests. Remember, your tests are acting as a client. They can now run against a server. Thank you very much. That's what I have to show you about how to break up the big model into 2 submodels. This video will make so much more sense when you read it when you watch it as a companion piece to the essay of the same name. Thank you.